Let's go ahead and review some of the key concepts in Lesson 4, Real Property Issues. In our key concept review, you'll remember we began the discussion in Lesson 4. We talked about the four value characteristics of demand, utility, scarcity, and transferability. But then we also talked a little bit about the physical characteristics of real estate called immobility, indestructibility, and uniqueness. Those physical characteristics make real property transactions different than personal property transactions because only real property has those three physical characteristics. Not true with personal property. Any item of personal property is mobile. You can move personal property. Think of a car anywhere you want to. Indestructibility. Things that are personal property are destructible. And uniqueness. There really isn't much difference between one car, one vehicle, and another. So real property has these three physical characteristics that personal property does not. We also talked about the broad forces, pegs, that affect value to real property. And we also discussed other factors that affect value. And these factors, basically, a better way of characterizing them, are these really are appraisal principles. And we talked about highest and best use and location and principle of substitution, conformity and contribution. These are aspects that appraisers use when they're appraising property. Market value is what we think a property is going to sell for. We need to be looking at properties if we're going to use them as a comparable that have not been involved in anything other than arm's length or a fair transaction, if you will, typical conditions. So if there are unusual circumstances in a particular sale of property, the price that property sold for would not be considered market value. We would probably not use it as a comparable. An appraisal is an opinion of value, and again, an appraisal opinion of value done by an appraiser. And the first thing the appraiser would do in determining and coming up with his opinion of value is determine what kind of property he's appraising. If it's a residential property, he would use the sales comparison approach or the market data approach. Either of those terms is correct. Sales comparison approach or market data approach in appraising residential real estate. If he was appraising income producing property, he would use the income approach. And then the cost approach would be used where we have a unique building that isn't residential and it doesn't produce any kind of income. So any kind of property that there's no comparable to, residential property, there's no comparables out there, and if it's a non-income producing property, okay, then we would be using the cost approach. Real property we talked about is basically the land and anything appurtenant or attached to that land that's permanently attached. We would call that real property. Sometimes we refer to that as the bundle of legal rights that are on the property, which are the right of possession, the right to enjoy the property, the right to disposition, the right of exclusion, the right of controlling the property. Those are the broad rights, major rights, if you will, that property owners have in their real property. Encumbrances are any right in a property that might diminish the value. So encumbrances kind of get a bad name. Sometimes encumbrances are actually good as far as affecting the value of the property. But two major kinds of encumbrances are easements, okay, which are the right to use another person's property. And there are kind of two types of easements. There's easements appurtenant and there's easements in gross. The difference is easements appurtenant are those easements where we have two adjacent tracts of land, two parcels of land next to each other, and that's why the parcel that benefits from that easement is called the dominant tenement. The parcel that serves the other parcel, the parcel that the easement runs across, that would be the servient tenement. And then the other broad category for easements are easements and growths, and we kind of finished up our discussion talking about easements and growths being basically utility easements on one parcel. Easements and growths don't have two parcels, if you will. The subject of the easement is on one parcel, even though your neighbor might have one too. It's the utility company's easement on that property, not yours. You have no interest in utility easements on somebody else's property. Easements can be terminated by release, merger, abandonment, prescription, or failure of expiration. Basically, an easement pertinent can be terminated on a couple of different ways. One is the dominant tenement, the one that benefits, goes to the servient tenement, the one where the easement runs across, and releases them. Maybe there's some monetary something that the servient tenement pays. But so the dominant tenement can release the servient tenement by themselves. The servient tenement cannot release the dominant tenement by itself. Abandonment, if my neighbor who has the easement on my property abandons it, clearly doesn't use it any longer. And this gets a lot more complicated than I'm making it here, but just as a sort of an overall view for you, a general view, if my next door neighbor abandons the easement, that could terminate the easement. Prescription, if the person that has the easement over the property doesn't use it for the prescriptive period of time and then tries to qualify for an easement, in Illinois that's 20 years, they would not be able to perfect their easement right. And then if there's other purposes that the easement was, let's say, set up for. Let's say that the easement that you went across my property was to go to the lake, and then the lake dried up and they built houses on there. So if the purpose of the easement no longer exists, that would also terminate the easement. Liens can be voluntary and involuntary. They can be general and specific. So we have voluntary easements. A good example of that is that mortgage easement, where you voluntarily put that lien on your property. I said easement, I'm sorry. That mortgage lien, which you voluntarily put on your property. You could have an involuntary lien on your property, which you don't have any sort of choice in. It's put on your property. That could be like an eminent domain lien. That would be involuntary. One would be placed, by the government, a lien on your property. And then you've got these ideas of general liens, which attach to all your property, and specific liens that only attach to a specific parcel of property. As I said, general liens are the scary liens. They have, if you have a general lien placed on your property, let's say you don't pay your IRS taxes, they put a general lien on your property, that's not going to only affect that property, it's going to affect everything that you own, because those general liens are placed on all your property, wherever it's located, as many parcels as you have, including your personal property. So those are the scary ones. Specific liens only attach to a specific parcel of property that the lien holder and the lienor, the one that's doing the liening, and let's say a mortgage lien, it just attaches to that property. If you don't pay your mortgage lien, it's a specific lien. It only attaches to that specific parcel of property. Only that specific parcel of property can be sold to remedy that. Basically you don't have to worry about your personal property, garnishment of wages, and those kinds of things. Not going to happen basically with specific liens. Again, this gets a little more complicated. As a general rule, for you to understand. Okay, and general liens can be these, specific liens are the mortgage liens we talked about, property tax liens, mechanics liens. These liens, judgment liens and other attachment liens, those are general liens. Mechanics liens are a good example of specific liens that are placed on property when the owner does not pay contractors, subcontractors, or laborers, anybody that's improved the property. If you don't pay them, they have the right to put a lien on your property. Now, the big deal about mechanics liens is they can be secret liens. They don't have to be recorded right away. Mechanics liens have to be recorded within 4 months after that material man or that contractor or whoever you hired to do the work for your kitchen. Okay, if you don't pay them, they can formally record that lien on the public records, but they must do it within 4 months after they've completed their work. Up until that point in time, they basically have a secret lien on property. And then after they record that lien within 4 months after completing their work, they have 2 years then to take it to court and enforce it, or they'll lose their right to lien. We talked about licenses. I think we've got licenses down pretty well. I think we understand what they are. And we talked about encroachments. I think we covered that pretty well. Okay, continue on to the chapter quiz on lesson 4.